Alright, hi guys. This is a guest lecture video, and it's something I like to do with the short story class once or twice in the course. And for this one we have Mrs. Honstein.
Good evening.
Who will be discussing with us memorable endings. Something that by now you guys should have read both stories. You should have gone through the quizzes and the blogs. And getting ready and prepping for Unit 3 discussion and the music discussion. Actually switch those two things, music discussion, then the unit discussion. But I want you guys to be able to appreciate another spin from a different teacher, discussing, once again, memorable endings. And so we're going to discuss a few things about memorable endings, whereas, once again, that we've been emphasizing is that a memorable ending does not need to be something that is like a Hollywood explosion at the end. It can be something very subtle, and very elegant and refined and very simple. But Ms. Hans is going to take over and talk about memorable endings and in relation to characters. So, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, as Mr. Harmon said, you guys have gotten your first two stories out of the way.
For Unit 3.
For Unit 3, and those were Walter Mitty and Through the Looking Glass, right?
Yeah, The Looking Glass.
The Looking Glass, right. So characters are important because in the end, no matter what characters have been introduced in the story, there has to be some sort of conclusion with them. Not just your main characters, but any secondary characters that also move the plot along. So in Walter Mitty, the wife at the very end of the story, while she's there, and Walter Mitty is done with talking to her in the very end of the story, she's still always going to be there as that secondary character that moves his continuous dreaming along. She doesn't just go away after the story's done. She'll always be there. And then Through the Looking Glass, we realize that that character herself will never really change as a character unless she goes through that actual transition in real life. So the characters also can't have this massive transition of something that's completely different from them if they didn't experience it in a story. They have to have that catalyst in their real life in order to move it along. And so you want to make sure that the characters at the ending and in the middle of the story are continuing with your flow of the story, and at the end, their ending is realistic. It can't be completely off balance from where you began, because if it does, anything that you've done throughout the story doesn't make sense at the end, and your reader is not only disappointed, but also very frustrated with how the character is. So you've really got to work with making sure a character is complete from beginning to end, almost a backwards kind of way. What do you want the character to accomplish by the end of the story if there is a set goal, or what do you want them to learn and understand? Which
is really interesting that you bring that, because like we had discussed in a prior video, you know, the character of Nellie in The Looking Glass is we go from someone who's described pretty as being pretty shallow in the beginning, and then all of a sudden, as what could have been considered in the first read as kind of like a period of time or some kind of jump into the more contemporary timeline, which we end up knowing to be a daydream, essentially. She goes from this really shallow character to this almost unstoppable woman trying to save her husband and won't take no from an answer, forces her way into the doctor's house to kind of plead with him and stuff like that, and then wakes up and we're back. You know, we moved backward essentially into that, once again, that shallow character, because the last line is something along the lines of, you know, she sighs that relief that that's not her life. You know, which what we kind of take from that is, you know, in that daydream, she's got this great big kind of wide love where she would do anything for, you know, that husband. And then we flip back to the shallow Nellie, who originally was daydreaming just about getting a husband, you know, who's the daughter of a landowner and a wealthy person, so on and so forth.
More about status than anything at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, you get the social, blue-blooded kind of standard
aspiration until she actually falls in love with him. But then,
which we never see, you know, that's because in the daydream she's already there with the whole love thing, which doesn't seem to be much of a priority whenever we're in the reality aspect of it.
Right.
You know? It's one of those things where it's almost like she's so shallow afterward. We're even looking at, you know, in that dream, she takes for granted that there's going to be that kind of powerful love, you know, with whomever it is that she ends up marrying.
Same thing with Walter Mitty's wife. She always takes for granted that he's there, that he's going to listen, he's going to listen to her and be kind of that person that she can rely on to complain to in a way, and she never sees it as an issue. But for him, he takes the exact opposite of the other character in the other story, and really makes his own dreams about it in order to escape, that sense that his wife is always going to be the nagging person there. It's always going to be that constant.
Yeah, and one of their quiz questions for Walter Mitty, I'm glad you said that, is essentially why do you think Walter Mitty fantasizes about these particular characters? It's like he's like a submarine sea captain. He's an attorney. He's like I think a surgeon. He's the defiant rebel at the end, and this, that, and the other. They're all positions of power.
Confidence, really.
Yeah. Confidence. A little bit of arrogance, especially at the end. Throws the cigarette down, faces the firing squad. But in his fantasies, there's always this, in whatever degree, he's the captain, the head of the ship. He's the attorney who's doing this, that, and the other, who's riveting the court. He's the surgeon, doing this, that, and the other, and the defiant rebel who's taking on the army, facing death on, head on. And they're all positions of power and confidence, whereas in his real life, he's not. It's almost like he's I don't want to say he's a doormat, but he's knocking on its door.
It kind of always reminds me of Walter Mitty, especially. You have those moments when you have conversations with people, and then 15 minutes later, after the conversation's done, you're like, oh, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have acted that way. Mm-hmm. It's Walter Mitty kind of brings that out, where he actually gets to live that out in his fantasy, how he wishes he would have acted, or how he could act in that actual situation. And in real life, we have that happen so much to us. Even tonight, we have things that you're like, oh, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have thought about that, or, you have these wonderful ideas come to your brain later on, and Walter Mitty kind of gets to live that out a little bit through his dreams of what, if he had that chance to do that, if he had that confidence and that ability, here's what he would really be like, kind of that afterthought.
Yeah. And tonight, what Sarsi's referring to as tonight, we just a little bit ago got done critiquing Ethan in prep for the tournament coming up. a lot of hours, a lot of time. It'll be good. It'll be fun. But yeah, it's like even after, like in reality, as adults and coaches, stuff like that, even afterward, you're still reflecting on what you've seen, and then you're thinking, oh, that would have been a good thing to tell them at the time, so on and so forth. But yeah, I think everybody goes through those Walter Mitty moments where we and we mentioned this in a prior video where you visualize yourself in these daydreams as Superman, not Clark Kent.
Right.
But I mean, the one thing I think that did a great job of, seeing that. You've seen the Walter Mitty Ben Stiller movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. He does that. That's such a great example of the rethinking those everyday interactions. Whenever he's talking to the girl and she's talking to her friend, like, oh, she's talking to her mountain climbing boyfriend, and she was just joking, and then he imagines himself as the mountain climbing boyfriend. He imagines himself, fighting his boss. That great, beautiful scene whenever he tackles him through the elevator, through the building, and then whenever he saves the puppy, he jumps from the platform of the train into the building, saves the puppy, gives it back, and it's a one-legged dog, and he manages on the way down to make the prosthesis. So, it's like, I hope you don't mind, but I live by the ABC, so it was action bravery or something. Yeah, confidence or something like that. But it's one of those things where we're kind of off topic with the memorable endings, but I mean that just goes to show the
your characters have to be memorable too throughout the entire piece, whether it's not just the ending, but if you're building whatever character you're building up or tearing down, even in some respects, you've got to make it memorable, because a good story like Walter Mitty or The Looking Glass has that character that even in a small amount of time can get built up or torn down in a second flat, but there's got to be that exposition behind the reasoning for it. You've got to have all the build, you've got to have all the Lego blocks, really, to build this tower of this character. And in Walter Mitty's case, you keep that tower built up because he's going to keep continuing being that defiant person, always having those dreams about how he can be a better man, even if he can't be a better man in real life. But The Looking Glass, that if she never actually experiences that, she will not become that really good, strong woman who will do anything for somebody else. if she doesn't actually have that happen to her.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the idea of breaking a character down, because it's one of those things where a lot of writers, especially first-time writers and student writers, spend a lot of time at the beginning discussing the physical, aspect of their character, what they look like, what they did. And they just tell you and they don't show you in the writing, which is a fallacy of many beginning writers, which is something that we'll discuss in Unit 4. Whenever we actually start discussing physically, or specifically the combining the elements and stuff like that. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But the idea is like, a lot of times we focus on building a character up. Whenever a lot of good work is about the, for lack of a better word, not so much the deconstruction of a character, but the destruction of a character. I mean, a recent example of that I've used in prior videos is like, Fight Club, Tyler Durden versus Jack, which can relate to earlier on with Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It's if you guys haven't read that, it's really short. Read it. You can download the audiobook for free on anything, and it takes like an hour to listen to it, and a lot quicker if you just read it.
Or if you were just in my Advanced English 3 class, we just finished it and did a whole unit on it, so you should be ready and prepared for that.
yeah, do it. Because what happens with that is basically you have this idea of good. Originally, it's not good versus evil, but basically a way to isolate good or to cut out evil like a cancer, depending on it. And what happens is almost this addiction between the two. And it's very, very interesting how the idea of the whole book being essentially this confession of Jekyll as he's losing control at the end, which stop me if I'm wrong, but it does end with his death, or at least the
original version, yeah.
Yeah.
The actual Robert Louis Stevenson version, yes.
So what was the contemporary version? Didn't it like drop off where you kind of like...
He kind of more disappears, and like the idea of where he could have gone, like you really don't know like where his character went. Where in the original version he's gone. He's just completely
Hyde's gone, and the police are like on the way or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And even in the more contemporary versions that we're referring to, it's one of those things where you might not see it happening, but whenever there's it's a crash test dummy going 70 miles an hour towards a brick wall, what's going to happen. Yeah. So I mean, even then, it's
he can't control it forever. There's no way for him to get past that, and that's really that character. His almost destructiveness, like you say, you're not just building a character up in that instance. You're tearing them down the way that what he originally went out to do is to separate this idea of good and evil, and it becomes so much of an addiction that it tears him apart as a character.
Yeah.
And that becomes the ending, is that tearing apart of the character, not just physically, but literally.
Yeah, Hyde taking over longer and longer, and the physical change is lasting longer and longer, and his mind going, And it's one of those things where, the character of Hyde is, it's almost to where there's very little doubt that even Hyde knows that he's on an expired time card,
Right.
Like he's going to do as much
damage as he
can, but he knows he's going out, regardless of what, is the idea. And so it's very interesting that, you have what could be considered this full building of Jekyll, upstanding citizen, versus basically the wrecking crew that is Hyde. And so, and also that's a really memorable ending if you guys look at it. It's because the whole framing device of that whole story is basically Dr. Jekyll's last conscious moment before Hyde takes over. And so you get this whole confession. So it's really interesting how Stephen's even basically a lot of how that this could never happen ever again, because there was one batch of tainted chemicals. He doesn't know where it was tainted from, or when, or what, or this, that, and the other.
You get kind of into that original kind of Marvel almost idea of the universe of like it can only be happen once. There can only be one Spider-Man. There can only be one Captain America. It's kind of that original superhero idea, a little bit in there.
Yeah. In fact,
it can never be duplicated. It can never be replicated.
In fact,
at that point.
Stephen Moffat. And Mark Gatiss, the guy who do Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock of the BBC, and Doctor Who from BBC. They actually wrote a series which only was a limited series because they didn't get picked up for a second series called Jekyll, where the whole premise is that it's Jekyll's last descendant in contemporary London, and Hyde's like taking over, and he doesn't know what's going on, and that it turns out that Stevens actually did write it as nonfiction, and it actually was, and it was conceived as fiction. And that, the whole series, like, well, Jekyll never had any descendants, Jekyll never had any descendants. It's like, no, but Hyde had a lot. And so, yeah, it was one of those things where even then it's the deconstruction of someone who is already well built and established and a good citizen and a good person. And then, the whole premise of the book is the demolition of that. Which also, feel free to do something along those lines. Just, same thing. Any other comments on anything?
No, we're just kind of having fun in Dallas here and enjoying our time and enjoying. We'll have lots of characters that we'll be seeing the next couple of days in the pieces that we see with our kids. So it'll be really neat to see what some other things that we get along the way that can help you guys out, not only in this class but in the other classes this next year coming up. So it's lots of fun here.
And if you guys have never taken speech and debate class, you should.
Yeah,
do it.
We rock.
Yes, it's fun. You get to do stuff like this. like make educational YouTube videos at 10:30 at night.
And then get up tomorrow and
do some more practice.
Do some more practice and register. So, yeah, officially.
All right, guys. By the time you see this, it'll be Sunday, and everything will be put up as far as that. This will be put immediately after your Secret Life of Walter Mitty quiz and blog. And then after this, you'll do the music discussion. So click on that link. Make sure you watch the video and listen to the lyrics. And then the unit discussion overall. So, all right, guys. Hope you enjoyed. And get that to me as soon as you can. Next, after this, you have Unit 4, which is dedicated strictly to the writing of your own short story, which will consist of talking about combining those elements, going over the rubric, your first draft, going through the 7 steps of the revision process, and then your final draft, which essentially will be your big, what you can consider your assessment for this course. So please pay attention to that. That's probably the most important part of this course is your actual short story, specifically the final version. So, all right, guys, until next time.